Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, I've written a couple of books. I've set up a business which exists to try and help managements and security people talk to one another about the challenge of securing personal data. The original book I wrote was called IT Governance because I thought that if anybody was to do anything about data security, it would require board commitment, effort and resources, and my view hasn't changed. Sadly, boards haven't yet completely got their head around what they need to do. IT governance as a business has grown up around that simple concept of enabling organizations to access whatever it is they need in the way of books, tools, training, education, consultancy support, and whatever mix they need to tackle the broad range of issues from cybersecurity through data protection, penetration testing, and so on. We certainly didn't expect back in April last year when GDPR became law that we'd find ourselves where we are today, apparently the market leader in delivering GDPR Foundation practitioner training, and with the business growing at somewhere in excess of 150% on last year as a result. I'm going to talk briefly about what I call cyber denial, the link between that and GDPR. I'm sure over the course of this conference you'll have heard more than enough about that particular subject. The Network and Information Security Directive, which for quite a lot of the UK is going to suddenly turn out to be at least as important as is GDPR, a cyber resilience maturity model, and the kind of actions that organizations should be thinking about. The interesting reality, if you talk to most organizations, and this comes from an Accenture survey, most boards are confident, they say, in their cyber defenses. They say cybersecurity is completely embedded in their processes. It's a board-level concern. There's top executive focus. And I'm sure you'll recognize the truth in those statements, don't you? Those same organizations suffer something like 100+ targeted attacks per year, of which they admit that 1 in 3 are successful. That's 2 or 3 per month for organizations who claim that cybersecurity is completely embedded in their processes, with most of those breaches being discovered by outsiders, not by the switched-on sharp security team internally, but by outsiders. So that kind of means that somebody's lying. Somebody's not telling the truth about what's really going on. Part of the range of services we offer is a cyber health check. We're going to do a very fast review of a number of areas of cyber health inside an organization, covering externally facing defenses, staff awareness, risk management structures, and all of the components that add up to an effective cybersecurity posture. Here is an organization that we did such a check on. They thought that they were fairly secure in their processes, pretty well embedded in what they were doing. 4,000 staff, they're in health. Health is important where data protection is concerned. And across the UK with multiple outlets. We found in this test 14 critical internet-facing vulnerabilities, 175 medium-level vulnerabilities in their websites and their internet-facing infrastructure. Vast uncertainty across the organization over roles and responsibilities in relation to security. They didn't know whether they had cyber insurance or how they might deal with the impact of a significant cyber attack. They didn't actually know whether they had any cyber attacks. They certainly had no method of risk management. They hadn't done a risk assessment in relation to data or cyber risk or anything in the last 3 years. Thousands of boxes of paper records, millions of electronic personal records, but no data inventory. No idea of actually what data at a board level they held, where it was. 2 different data protection policies inside the organization, no incident response, no information security management system, no formal staff training and awareness. It was kind of like every part of the cyber health check, the answer was, no, we're not doing it. In an organization that whose board thought that they were reasonably secure. Now, all of you, I'm sure, have a reasonably good sense of what the cyber risk landscape really looks like. You've got a bunch of different attackers, ranging from hacktivists and terrorists all the way through to competitors, nation states, and enemies. You've got weaknesses in the 3 major attack domains: people, process, and technology. And once people get inside, they're going for any mix they can of your assets: IP, card data, personal information, money, reputation, whatever it is they can get, they're pursuing. That's kind of how it really does look. And cyber risks are, of course, driven by the fact that organizations have increasingly valuable digital assets, easy to nick, high-value research and technology, politically sensitive data, voting information. Gosh, who would have thought? Sensitive internal information, personal data, customer information, high-value physical assets controlled digitally, infrastructure, utility infrastructure, and so on. Multiplicity of threat actors, complex supply chains, rapid technology evolution, inadequate staff awareness are some of the typical challenges facing all organizations. And if you go and look at ENISA, and ENISA, the European, I know Europe is apparently a bad thing, but they have a security agency which collects data across the whole of Europe and provides a threat survey. Key trend they talk about in 2016 is what they call the optimization of cyber crime turnover. Optimization by criminals of the turnover they're making out of the work they're doing. Not just a bit of random theft and pillage, but optimizing in the same way that grown-up organizations try and optimize their revenue. So are criminals optimizing what they're doing in terms of revenue from cybercrime. Their superiorities, according to ENISA, start with the fact they're able to mobilize unsecured components on a large scale to create large-scale attack potential. They're talking increasingly about Internet of Things. Very successful extortion attacks, getting high levels of ransom and high levels of victims actually paying, because it's a lot simpler than solving the problem. Of course, when you pay the ransom, they're not going to come back again, are they? They're going to say, thank you, once is enough, we don't need any more money from you. Attackers are good at big, high-impact, multi-layered, multi-channel attacks, multiple channels, multiple threat vectors, and they have large malicious infrastructures that, hey, they know about the cloud too. They're multi-tenanted, they're efficient, they're resilient. They can employ folk, without obviously employment contracts, they're kind of difficult to enforce in that environment, who earn a lot of money running highly efficient and effective attack systems. The policy conclusion they make is that policymakers should be establishing what they call common denominators for responsibilities, areas of concern, open issues, and courses of action with regard to cybersecurity in general. What that is, we think, is code for it's time for regulation. Now, it's interesting when you look at the data about organizations paying attention to cyber risk. And the data says very clearly that the biggest vulnerability remediation rates happen when organizations are reacting to compulsion, to regulation, not when they're managing risk because they're sensible and grown up and they know they should be managing risk because they've got an obligation to stakeholders and shareholders and everybody to manage risk. No, it's because they are driven by compliance. Vulnerability remediation due to a risk-oriented posture is delivering the lowest remediation rates. That means from a cyber crime, cyber risk, cyber security management perspective, hoping for people to tackle cybersecurity on the basis of this is how to manage your risk is a busted flush. It's quite clearly not delivering results. The Information Commissioner, just to link that through to GDPR, said very clearly that GDPR mandates organizations to put in place comprehensive but proportionate governance measures. She says it's about accountability. It's about board down through the organization accountability for embedding data protection policies and procedures inside the organization. You have to change the culture of the organization, she said. It can't simply be data protection as a bolt-on, it has to be data protection at the heart of what the organization does. A bit like, hey, health and safety, perhaps. And she says some organizations will get that this is a huge competitive advantage. We recognize that a few will have to be dragged kicking and screaming into the arena of data protection. And by the way, we've got some very big sticks. We've got powers with GDPR to exercise significant punishment for people who don't do stuff. And again, you guys will know all of the big headline stuff about GDPR. 4% of annual global turnover is the top level of fine. It applies to effectively the whole of the world that's processing the data of the personal data of European residents, and it comes into force on the 25th of May next year. And by the way, that comes into force. It doesn't mean after that you need to start complying. It means on that day you need to be in compliance. So for all of the organizations who think that January next year is quite a good time to perhaps start thinking about what you might do, you're approximately 18 months late. The transition period started in May last year. So you've got quite a lot of work to do, and on the 25th of May, by then everything should be working in line with GDPR. And that's where what GDPR brings in should be making your board sit up and worry. Article 77, data subjects have got the right to lodge a complaint with the supervisory authority because they don't like the way you're processing their data. They don't like the decisions the supervisory authority arrives at, they can get effective judicial remedy, which means go to a court and ask a court to make a finding in their favor. More excitingly, from the data subject's point of view, they've got a right to an effective judicial remedy against a controller or a processor where they feel their rights have been transgressed. And you can imagine somebody saying, I just discovered that you've got records on me going back 20 years. I didn't know they were there. Now that I know, I'm so upset and distressed, I've been unable to go to work. I've been signed off for the rest of my life, and therefore I need to bring a very large financial claim against you. This is going to happen. There are lawyers who, not able to support PII applications and other applications, are going to discover that there are many people with serious infringements of their personal rights that need proper support through the court to effect protection and recover. The right to compensation for non-material damage is precisely what I'm talking about. Article 82 says, and there is no ceiling on the non-material damage or the compensation that a person can seek. So that's one way to get into trouble. Let a data subject discover you're doing stuff wrong and bring a complaint against you. The other way to get into trouble is to have a breach. And if anybody here genuinely believes they've never had a breach, I'd really, really be so interested to find out what your evidence is for that. When you have a breach, you're mandated to report it to the Information Commissioner within 72 hours. If you're a processor, you've got to report it to the controller with whom you've contracted pretty well as fast as you can. Yes, what without undue delay really means we don't know yet, but it probably means less than 72 hours. Data controllers got to report to the Information Commission and say, hey, we had a breach. And not only have we had a breach, this is what we're doing to address it. This is who we think has been impacted. Now, what do you think the Information Commission is going to do when told that you've had a breach? She's going to say, okay, good luck with sorting it out. Let us know once it's fixed. That's really kind of you to do stuff. Or do you think she's going to say, that's terrific. We'll be round to carry out an investigation just as soon as we can get staff free from the other 93 investigations we've currently got underway. And the fines will be based on what the investigation shows up, not on the transgression itself. That's been very clear in what the Information Commission has already said. It's the investigation and the level of negligence that the investigation throws up that will trigger the level of fines, not the minor transgression that led to the breach. So you choose not to get GDPR compliance in the hope that you never have a breach, knowing that if you have a breach, what's going to be exposed is the fact that you negligently didn't get on with fixing stuff. Is it surprising that the government has said it's going to use GDPR as an opportunity to incentivize significant improvements in cyber risk management? The UK government has spotted quite clearly that regulation is what's going to get boards to do something about cyber risk. If the government has a cyber risk strategy, that means that Britain is supposed to be the safest place in the world to do business. It gets safe because it can blame the European Union for bringing in these rotten fines. Interestingly, though, the British government, of course, hasn't done that. What it's said is, this is our regulation. We're implementing it. It's going to apply beyond Brexit. And we're going to probably go further, apart from a couple of areas where we're going to take advantage of derogations, but we're going to go further to set ourselves up as the most exciting information regime in Europe. And then there's the Network and Information Security Directive. It's a European directive. The British government has said it's going to implement it. It comes into national law at the beginning of May next year, even ahead of GDPR. It focuses on creating a national and pan-European cybersecurity incident response network. It's focused on saying to both critical national infrastructure organizations and to cloud platform providers, essentially, that they have to adopt technical and organizational measures to ensure the security of systems and facilities, to have procedures for incident handling, to have business continuity management processes, to be monitoring, auditing, and testing the effectiveness of those processes, and to comply with international standards as a method of demonstrating that you're meeting your obligations. The directive says that governments must create effective, proportionate, and dissuasive penalties for organizations that fail to comply. Those are the same words that add up to 20 million euros or 4% of global turnover. So think about what not complying with the with the Network and Information Security Directive also means. Coming along at around about the same time is the Privacy Directive, similar scale of fines. So the cyber health cyber health check we did, if this happened after May next year, they'd have to report the breach to the Information Commissioner if they know about it, if they know how to report the breach, if they've got an incident response mechanism. They have to deal with the investigation, which undoubtedly would lead to a conclusion that the organization demonstrates sustained negligence. So major multiple breaches of policies, monetary penalties in the upper bracket, a PCI compliance breach, investigation and fines. It's a healthcare organization, so it falls into the critical national infrastructure, probably penalties under the NIS as well. Potentially multiple court actions from individuals and data subjects who think that they've suffered. Big reputation damage coming out of all of that, tying up directors and senior managers for years. And again, if you think that doesn't happen, look at the consequences in organizations like TalkTalk and others where people have genuinely failed to do what they should have done and been forced out of their roles. So, what do you do about it? ISO 27001 is, of course, a sensible place to start because GDPR says adherence to an approved code of conduct is a good way of demonstrating that you've got to grips with your obligations. Not only does it tell the ICO that you have, but it also tells the board that it's doing its job properly because it's a framework that ensures that you have the right policies and that you're doing the monitoring and audit that you should be doing across all of the information assets and information security in the organization. And enables an organization really to start with doing basic stuff right and to progress not just to ISO 27001, which should be a basic level of security, but to start building a genuinely cyber resilient organization over the years ahead. And all organizations should be looking to get up to the point where they're managing security in their supply chain and have a genuine, resilient organization. So get a cyber health check. That's what my people want me to tell you, get a cyber health check. However you do it, what you're looking for is a mechanism to achieve exactly that. Board involvement, clear roles and responsibilities around cybersecurity and data protection, with a budget. The budget, you can work out what it should be. Calculate 4% of your global turnover and go to the board and say, I need 10 quid less than that. And you've got a starting point for a sensible conversation. Update, patch, test penetration, encrypt devices, inventory data, all of the things that you can read about in any book or manual on what to do about cybersecurity. It all starts with getting the board on board. And that all increasingly is going to be about saying to the board, if you don't get your head around cybersecurity, the government, the Information Commissioner, is going to get its head around extracting large amounts of money from you. People say, don't do too much with the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I agree with that. Fear on its own should be driving boards to pay attention to what they should be doing about cybersecurity. Questions, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah.
I've got to stop you there. I've applied a little bit of chairman's discretion to let you run over, but your time is up, I'm afraid.
Perfect. We're at questions. So.
But what you had and what you stated is of vital importance to you all. It was a very comprehensive presentation as always, Alan, and I thank you very much indeed.
Sure.